If you've used Notion before, you know how the term database was associated with tables and popularized by Notion, one can argue. So a database corresponded to a table in Notion, and you could have linked views of databases. Recently, there has been a change, a structural change, where a database is now a container of data sources. A data source is a table. So a database can contain multiple data sources and views of those data sources. This represents a shift in how we define one of the most versatile and powerful building blocks in Notion. And it also has structural implications of how the API works, because now we don't refer to databases anymore. We refer to data sources in the API as well. So in this video, I'm going to go through all the changes and how to define a database, a data source, a view of a data source, pages within a data source, and how the API works. These changes were released recently at the beginning of September. Here is a simple current structure of databases and data sources in Notion. So that's the new structure. A database can contain one or multiple data sources. Each data source contains pages. Pages are rows in a database. They're called pages because you can expand them and fill them out with the body, just like any page in Notion. So you can see how a database is now a container. It is not the table itself. The table itself is called a data source. Let's look at practically what it looks like in Notion. You can see here, for example, there is team data source. Team is both a database and a data source, because here we only have one data source. So if I go to the settings of this database, and if I look at the source, that's team, that's this data source. And if I do manage data sources, you can see right now that in this database called team, there is only one data source. That's because I created this before the launch of the new data source model. And so we can say, in this case, that the database and the data source are the same. I have the option to add a new data source or to link an existing data source. That would create a linked view. We can go into more details on this later. Now, let's look at an example. Database composed of multiple data sources following the new paradigm. In this system, if I open PT database, you can see here there are multiple data sources. If I go to manage data sources, I can see all of them right here. There is clients that has one view in this database, invoices, program sessions, trackings, and adaptations. So the database is called PT database, and each table is a separate data source in this case. When I hover over it, I can also see the data source here. In a single database, I can also have multiple views of the same data source. For example, if I were to click on plus, add the new view, I can select the view type, and then I can select an existing data source from here. So if I add clients, I can use an existing view or create a new view. Let's say I'm gonna reuse it. And now if I go to the database settings here, manage data sources, I can see clients, that's the data source. And there are two views of this data source right here. I can easily copy the data source ID. I can move it somewhere else, and I can also delete it. Now I know that this one here is a view of the client's data source. So if I delete it, the client's data source still remains in the database. But if I delete the original data source, in this case clients, then it will delete the entire data source and all the pages within it. So this new structure allows to build a database that contains multiple tables in one single place. Whereas before, we could only build separate databases. So for organizational purposes, this can be a nice feature. Because now, for example, we can have a CRM database composed of all the tables needed in the CRM: contacts, companies, deals, interactions, etc., etc. In addition, having data sources in one database allows us to also use page level access rule from one single place, where we can define the page level access for each data source directly in here using user properties. And this is particularly useful to restrict access to specific pages in your data sources, to build a client portal, for example, which is a very popular use case, at least a requested one in the past. I've made a video about this that goes in depth about page level access. If you've used Notion before, you also know that we can create linked views of data sources. So if I use the slash command now and I do linked view of data source, it used to be called linked view of database. Now it is a linked view of a data source. When I do that, it works in exactly the same way as before. So in here, I can select data source. For example, I want to see clients. In here, I can use an existing view or create a different view. Maybe let's do a gallery, and I can set up everything that I need right there. Then I can filter, affect visibility, and so on. You can see this is a view. That's why there is this arrow in here. I can also hide the view title, maybe rename instead of gallery. This could be clients gallery. So that remains. And when I have a linked view, then I can add as many data source views as I wish. I want to add training sessions. I'm going to do that, select data source, and then filter and change the view as needed. And if I delete a linked view, that's okay. It just deletes that view and it doesn't affect the original data source. When there is a linked view block, I can always navigate to the data source from here. Open source database, which seems to be still using the old nomenclature, as you can see here. So there are some places where that's still the case in Notion. That's all there is to know fundamentally about the new structure. So there is a database, that's a container that contains one or multiple data sources. Each data source contains one or multiple pages. This is the Notion API documentation. You can see here databases has been deprecated. This used to be the endpoints used to work with databases in Notion, tables. Now there are data sources, and these are the actions that we can do. There are also databases endpoints following the new definition of databases. You can see here, if we were to create a database via the API, we create a database and its initial data source. We do that by sending the request body like so, initial data source, and then we set up the properties for that data source. So when we create a database, it needs to have at least one data source. Otherwise, there is no database without a data source. And here are the operations that we can do with data sources. These are the same operations that we could do with databases previously. They're just now renamed to data source. Now let's go to Make and see if the Notion module has been updated. Let's select search objects. And in here, I'm gonna type the name of the database that I want to look for. You can see it's not found, so I'm going to go directly to Notion and get the ID. Here is the ID of the database, and you can see how it is not found. That's why I can't select any filters, because PT database is not a data source. It is a database. Now let's try to switch to databases here, and I can do a query search. That's not what I want. So I'm going to try database items, and I'm actually going to manage data sources and copy data source ID for clients. And I'm going to go here, input the ID. I've just tested with get a database, inputting the PT database ID, and I got this result. As you can see here, databases with multiple data sources are not supported in this API version. So the make modules haven't been updated yet. Therefore, a way to do this would be to use the make and API call, and then use the latest API version, which I can find here. Yeah, that's the API version here, 2025-09-03. That's the date of release. So if we use this here in the Notion version, then we use the endpoint from the API reference, let's say databases, and I want to retrieve a database, that's a get, and then we're going to use /v1 databases /database ID. So I'm going to do /v1 databases, and then here I will input the PT database ID. That's a get request. We don't need any body. I'm going to run this module only, and I get a successful result here. If I open the body, I can see database, the ID, the title, that's PT database, the description of the database, if there is one. In my case, there is. And the parent, that's the parent page within which this database is nested. In my case, the personal trainer OS 3.0 template. And I can see all the data sources in this array, where I can see the ID of the data source, clients, and the name. So clients, invoices, programs, sessions, trackings, and training adaptations. I get the icon, I get the URL, and all the other data in here. So if I retrieve data sources, I can then use this array, maybe iterate over it via an iterator module, and then use that to do other actions depending on the use case. I've published some automation templates and examples in the past. If you want to check them out, you can find them in my channel, linked here or in the playlist section. Thank you for watching this video. If you want to work together, please submit an inquiry via the link in the description, where you can also find my website, products, and resources. See you in the next one.